everybody. Welcome to the Insight Seminar for Hedda Gabler. Woo! Thank you for being here. My name is Kim Montalibano Heil. I am the Associate Artistic Director of the Old Globe. I would love to acknowledge our friends Vicki and Carl Zeiger, if they're here, who are the sponsors of the Insight Seminar series, and we're grateful to them for their continued support. So if they are here, I'm sure they will appreciate it from afar if they're not here. I've said this before. This is not my first time interviewing this guy, but it really, truly is such a treat every time I get to speak with him because I am genuinely a fan and admirer of his work. And it's been truly my privilege over the last almost 5 years now that I've been able to work so close with him. And so when I have this chance to have this kind of conversation about him as an artist, we tend to talk about a lot of sort of operation stuff. And yes, we talk about the art, but you know, it's business, and we tend to talk about drier aspects of our work. And so this is really, truly exciting for me. So please join me in welcoming our Irma Finzi Viterbi Artistic Director, Barry Edelstein.
Thanks, Kim. That's so nice of you. Well, I feel the same way. Mutual Admiration Society up here on the stage.
Excellent. I wanted to start off. You know, you've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of interviewers, and I've read all of them. I've listened to your interviews. I don't know if many of you have had the opportunity to listen and to read some of his interviews. So some of you may actually know the genesis of this particular production of Hedda Gabler. But for those of you who haven't read anything, I'd love to share a little bit of what inspired you to, first of all, think of this play as part of the Old Globe's season.
Thanks. Well, so many different things. Impulses about being the artistic director of the Globe and the seasons that we do and what kind of plays we should do, and then personal relationships with artists that sort of came together right now around being able to do this project. First of all, Ibsen, you know, the great modern playwright, the father of modern drama. Ibsen, who wrote in Norway in the 1890s and revolutionized the theater, the first really significant writer to move away from stories about aristocrats and kings and upper class people and just write about normal people and their lives and marriage and family and career and most of all to situate the theater as a place to examine the role of the individual in society. So Ibsen brought psychological realism to the stage for the first time and changed everything and inspired every single writer who came after him. He was very quickly produced in English, both in the UK and in the United States, right around the time of while he was actually alive. And his influence is just massive. The Globe hasn't done any Ibsen in a while. We did a production of A Doll's House shortly after I got here. Yep. Might have been programmed by the staff when I was hired. I didn't even program it. And after a while, you say, well, how can you be a great theater company and not do Ibsen and not do Chekhov? We do Shakespeare all the time. So it felt like, well, we should really look at some Ibsen. I've had a love affair for Ibsen for a long, long time, but never managed to actually direct one. I directed a production of All My Sons, the Arthur Miller play, that changed my career, sort of established my reputation in 1997. Oh, God, long time ago. And Miller consciously decided to write an Ibsen play. That's what All My Sons is. Miller studied Ibsen deeply and said, I want to write an Ibsen play. And he wrote All My Sons, which is an Ibsen play. And I found I was really good at it, and it was incredibly successful. I mean, changed my life, that production. And I started reading around Ibsen and fell in love with it. I produced one when I was the artistic director of Classic Stage Company. I produced Ghosts with Amy Irving as Mrs. Alving, which was really fun. Daniel Fish directed it. Daniel Fish of Oklahoma fame. But you know, and I want to do one. So around that time, I was running a theater company in New York called Classic Stage Company. It still exists, CSC, people refer to it as, on 13th Street, just off of Union Square. Wonderful, amazing, terrific off-Broadway theater company. And I said, okay, I'm going to do Hedda Gabler. And I had a long relationship with a writer named Erin Cressida Wilson, who was a very famous playwright in New York in the 90s. She was a woman in her 30s at the time and was writing these very sexually frank feminist plays. And she was famous, but also kind of infamous because the plays were sort of so out there. She was a very, very big deal. And I said, there's something about her voice and the themes of Hedda Gabler and Ibsen that seemed to me to match. And so we started talking about doing Hedda Gabler. And right as we were talking about it, Kate Burton played Hedda Gabler on Broadway, which was 30 blocks north of where Classic Stage Company is. And we said, well, we can't do Hedda Gabler on 13th Street when there's a major revival on Broadway, so we just put it aside. Erin got swept away by Hollywood. She wrote the movie Secretary, which was a big, big deal, and she's been writing gigantic movies and TV ever since and has kind of retired from the theater. So I never got back around to it. Then I was here, and in 2018 we did a play called The Wanderers in the Cheryl and Harvey White Theater, which was very successful here and was picked up by the Roundabout Theater Company in New York, and Katie Holmes played the part of the movie star in that play. You remember it's about an Orthodox Jewish couple and then a couple of writers in Brooklyn and how their fates are interlinked, and there's a movie star in the middle of it. Katie played that part in New York, and she and I just got along tremendously. We had a wonderful, wonderful collaboration. So when it was done, this was February, March of 2023, I said, you know, you should come to San Diego and do a play. And she said, as soon as my daughter goes off to college, I will. Give me a list of plays. And Hedda was on the top of the list. Katie said, I'd love to do Hedda. And then I said, hey, I should call Erin. And Erin, who I had spoken to about it 20 years ago, and Erin said, it took you 20 years to call me back? And she said yes. So the reason we're doing it here is that these two extraordinary women who are friends of mine and colleagues of mine happened to be available now to do it. We started working on it, I'd say in earnest, a little over a year ago. And so that's why we're here. You know, the Globe as a producer of classic plays, my own artistic interest, and the fact that I'm blessed enough to be friends with these two extraordinary women of the American theater. And it all kind of came together here, February 26th. Kind of amazing.
I do want to ask, yes. I do want to ask where your interest in this character comes from, because she is such a complicated and complex, I should say, woman. I've heard you say that she is the female Hamlet in terms of roles that are out there in the theater canon.
That's not my phrase. That's other
it's
people.
not?
No,
Okay.
no. Others call her the female Hamlet. Yeah, I can't take credit for it.
But I mean, you know, talk about. I've heard Ibsen described as the father of psychological realism, and you know, his plays certainly have had a tremendous impact on storytelling and just how women, especially, have been viewed. And so I'm curious, you know, why her? Why Hedda?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Is it a horrible thing for me to sit in public and go, I love women. I love women. I find women so interesting and fascinating, and you know, I'm blessed in my life with extraordinarily complicated, fabulous, wonderful, deep, rich women. So it's an extraordinary thing for me to be able to just be around. This production, as you know, Kim, is majority women behind the scenes, right? Other than myself, the set designer and the costume designer, all the other creatives are women. Erin and the composer and the lighting designer and the sound designer and yourself and Bex and Danielle. You know, it's really there are enormous number of women in positions of artistic authority in the show, which is wonderful given what the piece is about. Ibsen was really interested in what we would call feminism. I don't think he would have thought to call it that. He was interested in the way in which women were circumscribed, the opportunities for women were circumscribed in his society. that men had all the power, that the patriarchy dictated everything, that what women did was get married and have children and raise the children and look good and throw parties and keep quiet. And he was interested in interrogating that. And not only interrogating it, but showing how sort of what a dead end it is for all of human society when 50% of the population is marginalized in that way and put into a box in that way. And, you know, what's been fascinating about working on it is she's this extraordinary character. You know, when it was premiered, it divided everybody. The critics hated it, many. Half loved it, half hated it. It took a long time for the play to actually find an audience because she's so difficult. She's in many ways kind of repellent, but on the other hand, she's vulnerable and she's charismatic and sexy and appealing. She's also rude and vicious. She drives people to commit acts of violence. She commits acts of violence herself. Extremely difficult human being to be around. And somehow Ibsen manages to endow her with a kind of humanity that makes you care about her story. And we watch stories about men who do those kind of things all the time and think, what a great story. You know, that King Lear, oh my God, and he does things that are, worse than Hedda does, and we go, oh, I can't wait to see King Lear. Somehow when it's a woman, it's more problematic. The interesting thing about reviving these old plays is how, as the world changes, the play changes with the world. So, you know, we live in a moment now where women are heads of state, where women are CEOs of great corporations, where women possess and exercise real power in our culture, and yet still the patriarchy is this incredibly formidable thing. You know, sadly, the patriarchy's been making a bit of a comeback the last couple of years, right? And so the issues of the play from the feminist point of view are still there, though in a slightly different way. But the center of Hedda's problem becomes not, how do you make a go of your own dreams as a woman in a world of men? That's the play in 1891. What happens, how does a woman find self-expression and self-realization in a patriarchal world of men? Now it's about, how does an imagination that is somehow beyond the normal, how does a mind, a soul, a heart that is beyond normal, that is extraordinary in some way, flourish in a world that wants to not deal with people like that, right? That's really what the play turns out to be about in 2026. Yes, it's a play about the horrors of the patriarchy. Yes, it's a feminist play. It always will be. But also, it's a play about creativity and originality and how the world is threatened by that. And what you find when you watch it is she is so much more imaginative, innovative, wild, thrilling than everybody in this little college town where she lives, and she can't, they won't allow her to actually be that thing, you know? It's fascinating to watch. It feels to me very much like working on Shakespeare, where, you know, as the world moves and as human civilization evolves, the plays oddly come along and start to twist and turn and show you different sides that keep up with it. And, you know, the joke I've been making is when there's a theater on Mars, Hedda Gabler will be produced there, you know? It is one of the truly great plays ever written. You know, the Elon Musk Repertory Company presents Hedda Gabler, you know? Yeah.
I actually have a theory, Barry, based on your body of work, at least the work that I've seen recently here at the Globe, and having spoken to you about some of your interests in the kind of storytelling that you are interested in, is that you have, you're drawn to people whose interior lives don't match or are incompatible with the exterior life. And I've seen that with like The Wanderers and the sort of exploration of that in what we talk about. And I'm curious if I'm hitting on something, because it seemed to me that you've talked so much about Hedda being this woman who is trapped by really not just the confines of society, but her own hunger and desire for influence and impact. And how that just, it can become destructive in the face of reality.
So interesting. I don't know. It's great to hear you say that. The only thing an artist ever wants is for people to understand what they're doing. But I don't know. I don't have that perspective on my own unconscious in that way. Maybe that is something that I'm trying to work out, and it comes out in these plays that I direct.
And it comes out, I think, also in a fascination with language, right, with Shakespeare, and also with your interest in music. I just want to say that there is this additional language happening in the backdrop of Hedda, which is the music that you've added to this atmosphere.
Yeah, I love music in the theater. Since in the 14 years I've been running the Old Globe, there's been so much music in the theater here that it's really opened up my imagination and made me think about the power of music on stage in all kinds of ways. But I started putting live music and needle drops of pop songs into Shakespeare plays that I was directing when I was in college. Just something I've always really enjoyed. And when I was in New York directing Shakespeare, I started asking classical music composers to write incidental scores for the plays. Typically, one turns to musical theater composers because they're in the universe of the theater. So theater directors say, "Oh, you're a theater composer. I need some music cues for my production of The Merchant of Venice. Will you write them?" And I always said, I don't know. I listen to a lot of contemporary classical music. So I thought, let's change the sound and let's move away from the familiar sound of music theater as I was hearing it in New York in the 90s, and let's ask classical composers to do it. So I did a lot of that back in the 90s when I was making Shakespeare in New York. And it really worked, and it sort of brought a freshness to it. And I know, people like Sibelius wrote incidental music scores. That's how a lot of these classical composers in Europe in the 19th and early 20th centuries made a living, because they weren't making a living writing big symphonies. So they would write incidental scores for theater shows, and that's how they put their lives together. So I started doing that. And if you've seen my Shakespeare work here, this audience over the years, I always have live musicians in it because I love it. It just adds something. It kind of lifts something. So one of the things about Hedda is that the plot is this newlywed couple, and they move into a new house. And Hedda's really uncomfortable in this new house because it was purchased and furnished while she was away on honeymoon. And when she gets into the house, she just doesn't like all the stuff that's there. But one thing that's there is her own piano. And Ibsen makes a big deal out of the fact that Hedda's piano is on the stage. She plays the piano a couple of times, and I thought, well, I'm going to have a piano on the stage. I should ask somebody to write some piano music. And I went to a composer, a friend of mine, a guy named Michael Torkey. Some of you may know Michael Torkey is a really important composer, American classical music composer. And he and I have done a lot of plays together over the years, including here at the Old Globe. I did a production of The Winter's Tale when I first got here, and he wrote the incidental score for that. And I said, Michael, I'm doing this Hedda Gabler. I want to do an incidental music score for piano, but you're a boy, and I really want to hire a woman. And he said, then you got to call Caroline Shaw. And I knew a little of Caroline Shaw's music because she's a very big deal. She's got 5 Grammy Awards and a Pulitzer Prize, right? No slouch. Amazing. The thing about the Old Globe is everybody knows the Old Globe. So you call up an artist and you say, "Hi, I'm calling from the Old Globe. I've got Katie Holmes here. We're doing Hedda Gabler. Would you like to write the incidental music score?" And she said, "Yeah." And so this composer, Caroline Shaw, has written what's about 90 minutes of music that plays on this piano. There's a live piano player. The wonderful Kori Yamaoka is on stage the whole time. And there's this piano music playing throughout the show, sometimes functioning like underscoring in a movie. Just sort of going along, and sometimes when the scene is dramatic, the music is dramatic. Other times it plays in counterpoint to what's going on stage. And, you hear Caroline's very specific idiomatic sound, but you also hear the sound of contemporary American classical music. You hear a little Steve Reich here and there. You hear a little Philip Glass here and there. It's kind of really fascinating to watch it go. And I gave her one note. We talked, and she said, "Well, what are you looking for?" And I said, "I want the piano to be the sound of the inside of Hedda Gabler's head. That's what the piano should be." And that's what we got. It's amazing. So it's really extraordinary. I mean, it really lifts the whole thing in this magical, magical way, and is, I think, so far, based on what audiences have been telling me, it's a central part of what the audiences are enjoying about the production, which I'm glad of.
Speaking of, we've talked a little bit about what are sort of these elements of what makes a Barry Edelstein show. And I know that you don't want to be sort of boxed into, this is what I always do. But I will say that something that I've seen that I think you do so beautifully is you're not a scenic designer, and yet you have such a strong visual imagination for the world that your characters live in. And I think something that I've seen with Henry and with the Wanderers is that you have, and Romeo and Juliet, you have these grand gestures, these scenic gestures that are so impactful in an otherwise spare set.
Yeah.
And the gesture is often not just static, it's very, the actors engage with it. It moves. It sort of lives and breathes and has its own life, kind of like the sandbox, if you all saw that with Romeo and Juliet, on that giant table, right, in The Wanderers, which was so stunning. And then now we have...
Couch.
Yes.
Big couch.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, thanks. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I've been directing plays for close to 40 years, and you do start to go, I've only really got one idea. I've got one idea, and I keep looking at this same idea from a different perspective all the time. But, you start to, and you're right. I have found in my work on plays that typically I will get hit by an image. I walk every morning. I live in South Park on Switzer Canyon, and I walk every morning. And it's a very meditative time for me. And I find that often I'll be on a hike, and an image will come into my head. And in this case, it was there should be a huge couch on a turntable. There should be a huge couch, and it should spin around. Now, what color, how big, what shape, how does it work? I didn't know. That's Mark Wendland, the scenic designer. But I call him up and I say, I'm going to do Hedda Gabler. I think there should be a big couch on a turntable. And then he goes to work from there, And that's really true in my work. I feel like I can't understand what the production is going to be until that image pops into my head. And I don't know where they come from. That's the thing about creativity. Where does an idea come from? I don't know. It comes from my entire life up till this moment. It comes from my unconscious. It comes from some image that I saw that I don't even remember seeing. God knows. But the image that I had was a big couch on a turntable. But the other part of it is Erin's script. Yes. So Erin Cressida Wilson wrote this new version of the play, and the way it works is Erin does not read Norwegian, so to call it a translation is a little complicated because she didn't translate it, right? She doesn't read Norwegian. How it works is theater companies go to a scholar in that language and commission a literal translation, and we do this all the time. If it's Molière in French, if it's Bertolt Brecht in German, if it's Ibsen in Norwegian, and you get typically an academic, and you say, give me a literal translation, like word-by-word translation from the Norwegian to the English, and annotate it so that you hit a certain word and there are footnotes. Well, in Norwegian, this is a pun, and in English, it's hard to capture that. Or, in Norwegian, this verb tense is only really used in a very certain set of circumstances, which who would know if you're not a native Norwegian speaker? So we had one of those, right, which we call the platform translation. And to read it, it's not even English, it's in English, and it's every single thought of Ibsen's in order, but you can't read it. If you read it out loud, it would sound like, I don't know, one of those when you buy a piece of furniture that you have to assemble and it's made in China, and then the instruction manual is translated into English that doesn't really work as English. It's just weird. But Erin then took that platform translation and filtered it through her sensibility and stripped away. The thing about the Ibsen translations written during his lifetime is it's Victorian English, and the sentences are really long and full of subordinate clauses and full of flowery adverbs and adjectives, which most Norwegians will tell you is not the voice of Ibsen, but is the voice of Victorian England. And that's how we imagine him. And so Erin just took, just blew the dust off the thing. Took a weed whacker and chopped away the underbrush, and we're left with this sleek, fierce, spare thing that sounds like the plays that Erin was writing in the 90s and sounds like her screenplays, And so I thought, well, I can't do that script on a box set with windows and drapes and portraits and teacups and doilies. It wouldn't work. So we stripped away the physical production commensurate with the language that Erin had written. And in that sense, one couch on a bare stage starts to work, and it's cool. It actually does work incredibly well together.
No, I agree. I think it's just stunning out there.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Erin's script, because I do want to, it's one way that you've described it, which I love because there's such a visual element to it, is muscular. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's Erin's interesting. She's a wonderful artist and a great friend, and she moves through the world with a sense of ferociousness and bluntness. So the language in the script reflects that. People aren't very nice to each other in Ibsen's play. Some people will, if somebody says, yeah, oh God, I really shouldn't have said that, instead of the other person saying, oh, it's okay, they'll say, no, you shouldn't have. Right? And so there's a blunt force to the script that she's written. It's muscular in that sense, is that it's very compressed, and people express an awful lot through a little bit of language. And so it feels very, very highly charged because it has been essentialized in that way. And I'm a Shakespearean. I like big, long, bomber sentences. I love that. And I also, you all have heard me talk a lot. I talk in big, chunky sentences with big words in it, and I talk fast. And that's not what this is. This is fierce and compressed and intense. And it's just exciting. It's a marvelous expression of the strange world of Ibsen, I think.
I actually feel like it is... going back to what I was talking about earlier with the interior lives, it really feels like you're in the room with them.
Yeah.
That there is no filter through which, like you said, the sort of the era and the Victorian nature of how we think of Ibsen, that's all been removed, and so you actually feel like this is a time, and these are people that we know and that we can identify.
It's true. There's also a wonderful sense of irony in it, which I think many English translations of it don't capture. And Norwegians are, I don't know if you have any Norwegians in the place, Norwegians are very ironic people. There's something about the sensibility of Scandinavia, and maybe specifically Norway, very, very ironic. And Ibsen has this deep sense of irony. So Judge Brack, who's the bad guy in the show, who's this judge who gets involved in Hedda's life, he will say things like, I've always liked the man, and you know that he's always hated the guy. He's the kind of guy who would look at someone and say, that is an extraordinary sweater. And the person doesn't know whether he thinks it's a beautiful sweater or an ugly piece of junk, right? There's just an ironic sensibility about it that gives the language a kind of bite and edge, which I really, really, really like. It's also, what's different about Shakespeare is, in Shakespeare, there is no subtext. Everything that somebody feels, they just say, right? In Ibsen, that's not true. So much of it is coming out underneath, and Erin has gone even farther. So there are lines in this that are literally, uh-huh. Somebody will say, uh-huh. It's hardly, what is this quintessence of dust? Just uh-huh. But in that uh-huh is 100 pounds of ferocious, ironic bile, and it's very fun to listen to.
I'd actually like to lift the veil a little bit for our audience, many of whom have been, coming to our shows, and not just our shows, but the series for years and years, and sort of let you into a process moment that I witnessed that I just was fascinated by. So many of you may know that the early part of rehearsal is spent doing what's called table work, which is essentially they are reading through the play several times, I would say. And in your case, I think you stop and go quite a bit. And there was a moment that I witnessed, and this may have been day 2, where you stopped at the word darling and proceeded to take it apart for a good 15 minutes, just that one word, darling. And I was just entranced. Who knew that this, otherwise simple word would have so much depth and so much irony and so much, hidden meaning? And so could you maybe share a little bit of what your process is in the room when you're encountering that kind of language for the first time?
So, it's funny, all these years doing Shakespeare, it's really about, well, why are you talking that way? Given the idea that you're trying to express, the sun is coming up, why would you say, but look, the morn in russet mantle clad walks o'er the dew of yon high eastward hill, when what you mean to say is, the sun is coming up, right? Why do that? And at the end, and I talk about this a lot when I teach, the only thing I really know how to do in rehearsal is say, well, why are you saying that? Why are you saying that word that way? So when Hedda calls her husband darling, and right, I'm sure all of you know the story of Hedda Gabler, but the big Ibsen thing is what Ibsen does is he brings something from somebody's past back into their lives. And when that thing from their past comes back into their lives get blown up. So in Ghosts, it's an insurance policy that wasn't renewed. And for a series of reasons 20 years ago. And suddenly there's a fire, and the insurance policy wasn't renewed, and the place blows up, right? The dad had a lot of affairs, and he passed syphilis on to his son, and the dad had syphilis 30 years ago, and now it comes back into the place. Or in A Doll's House, there's a forged check that was, and that's why All My Sons is an Arthur Miller play. Arthur Miller's All My Sons is an Ibsen play, because it's this arms manufacturer who cheated the government out of money 15 years ago, and now it's come back, right? So in this play, it's the old boyfriend that comes back. And he sees Hedda call her husband darling, which to him is the height of bourgeois, sort of pale, weak, conventional expression. Because they, Hedda and this boyfriend, they made fiery love in the garden and wrapped her naked body in vine leaves and imagined the sun and the moon and the stars. And now she's a married woman having tea and calling her husband darling. And he can't abide that Hedda Gabler has now been reduced to marriage and a sitting room and a tea set and darling. So that word suddenly packs in it not just a term of affection that I would call my daughter when I ring her up in Wisconsin and say, hey, doing today, darling, right? It doesn't have any of that. What it has in it is hatred for an entire worldview and mourning for a love that never got to reach its fruition, right? And that's the process. Why are you saying that word darling? What does that word darling mean when you say it? And that's the only way I know how to do a play. That's what rehearsal is, asking those kind of questions.
Do your actors typically know what they're being asked when you say why are you saying this? Do they have the right answer pretty
Yes,
immediately?
actors always have the right answer because, and it's never an intellectual answer. It's always, it comes out in the next time they say the word. It just comes out in the way they say the word the next time they say it. I'm trying to think of a moment. Right. There's a scene in the play where the old boyfriend is a recovered alcoholic, and he got into big trouble through his drinking. And there's much made in the play that for the past 2 years he's gone straight. And in a terrible scene in the play, Hedda makes him drink. And it's horrible to watch her do this to this man that she loved, right? And she has a line that's a throwaway line, like, you're going out, there's a party that he's going to go to later. Remember, you're going out with the boys, and that's the line. Remember, you're going out with the boys later, something like that. And we talked about it, and we said, well, what she's saying is there's going to be a lot more alcohol later tonight. That's why she says, remember, you're going out with the boys. And so the next time we did the scene, Katie said it, and there was so much nasty ugly in it, simply because we had said, why is she saying that? Well, she's saying that because she's just encouraging him to drink more and more and more. So yeah, that's I don't know. I don't know another way to direct. Is there another way to direct? Maybe.
That is
I don't know.
truly the stuff that is so fun. That
Yeah, that's the fun stuff.
discovery.
Yeah. Especially when the actors are that good, right? I mean, Katie is, she's amazing. She's absolutely amazing. She's so resourceful, and she's so imaginative, and she's so alive. The wonderful thing about working with actors whose background is in film is that they are stunningly alive. Stunningly, stunningly alive. Not to say that stage actors aren't. It's just a different technique, because film acting is like capturing lightning in a bottle. It only matters when the camera is running. And so when that director calls action, you better be full of everything for that short moment. And what's fantastic watching her work is it's like we call action at 7:08 p.m. and she is just on for the next 90 minutes. She is absolutely extraordinary. And one of the mysteries of Hedda Gabler, it's made clear right away in the play that she attracts men like bees to honey. And she used to ride around town on her chestnut horse in her black dress with her braid flying in the air, and nobody could take their eyes off of her in a little college town in remote Norway, right? I keep talking about it as Middlebury, Vermont, right? And suddenly this movie star shows up in Middlebury, Vermont, riding her chestnut horse through town, and everybody is just going ga 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 ga. And there's Katie Holmes standing there, just magnetic and extraordinary, and you go, oh, I finally get it. I get it. She is that thing that just galvanizes everybody. And as an actor, we had a big talk about it today. It's different every night, although it's exactly the same. She's sitting on the couch at the same line every night. She gets up at the same line every night, and yet it's completely different and fresh and brand new every single night. She's a marvel. And I think all of us working on the show have found her Hedda to be a total revelation. It's a Hedda I've never seen before. It's just, she makes you understand why she is such a monster, because of the pain inside of herself and the set of expectations that have been placed on her by the world, which somebody of her degree of celebrity, I think, instinctively understands in a way, And it's just been amazing to watch her work.
I absolutely agree about Katie, and I also think that the rest of your cast is superb, and the chemistry
Totally.
between all of them is just like fireworks when they're up there.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, we always have wonderful casts at the Old Globe, always have really, really amazing actors. But, when you call up an actor and you say, well, there's this big celebrity in the middle of this, and it's Ibsen's greatest play, and this very famous playwright has adapted it, and the artistic director of the Old Globe is putting it together, and this Pulitzer Prize-winning composer, actors tend to say yes. And so we've gotten a really, really tremendous group of actors, and we've had great fun. It's a great group.
We are almost out of time, and I imagine some of you might have questions, if that's all right with you, Barry, maybe one or two.
Of course.
So if you do have a question, feel free to just raise your hand, and someone will come to you with a microphone. Do we have any questions?
Hi, do you collaborate with Katie Holmes, how she interprets the character, and then you modify the play?
Yeah.
To work on?
So with Erin in the room, we had many conversations about, that line feels long to me. Is there another way that I can say it? It would feel better in my mouth if I said it this way. And Erin had final authority over it, but of course would say, yeah, sure, say it that way. Maybe start it here and end it there. Not frequently, but Katie would absolutely, Katie and the other actors too, would share their instincts about how the language ought to sound. And then obviously in working on a scene, I would say to Katie, yeah, what is that? What do you think that is? Why is she doing that right there? And she would tell me her idea about it. Well, here's what I think it is. I think it's this. And I'd say, great, show me. And she would do it. Then I would respond and say, oh, that's really interesting, but what if this and that? So it's absolutely a conversation back and forth all the time. It isn't that the director says, do it this way. I mean, maybe there are directors who do say it that way. Hitchcock did it that way. Do it this way, right? That's not how I work. It's only going to be believable to you if it's authentic to that actor in that moment. So it's an ongoing conversation. Just this afternoon, we made a big change in Katie's entrance because she went home Sunday night after the show, and she just said, yeah, something's bugging me about the entrance. And she thought about it for a day, and then we came and talked about it, and I said, oh, that's a really interesting idea. And then we put it up on his feet and tried it out, and then the other actor who's in the scene said, oh, that's cool, then I can do this. And after 10, 12 minutes of work, the entrance just had a completely different shading to it, a completely different feeling to it than it had on Sunday night. And that's fun.
One other thing I've observed in the room when you all are, I think it was during table work actually, is that you all are very consciously, I believe, tracking the rhythm of the language, and especially between when it's dialogue and it's sort of like this person says this, then this person responds, then that person. Everyone in the room is feeling it, and they're all talking to themselves, going ba-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, and you can feel the sort of musicality of the language, and I love watching that.
Yeah, that's fun. It's very musical script in Erin's hands. Then we've got this piano going, so there's this musical sort of sensibility in the room. But the other thing about theater is that theater is a language medium, right? Film is not. Film is a medium of pictures, and the Steve Martin has this great joke, which is that in the theater, a great line is to be or not to be, that is the question. In the movies, a great line is, let's go. And he's right? It's just not, it's not a language medium, but the theater is. So a lot of our work was about technical things, right? The energy of the language has to drive forward all the time. So you can't say to be or not to be, that is the question. You can't. The language has to go drive toward the end, to be or not to be. That is the question. Or, any famous thing, we the people, in order to form, all men are created equal, right? That's the punchline, is the word at the end, not all men are created equal. So there's a lot of technical work about getting through to the word at the end of the line, coming in quickly on cue, not letting there be any space between your line and the next person's line, building crescendos, building climaxes, and working it again and again and again until the music of the thing just starts to take off. And when you have really talented actors who are trained and skilled and experienced, you can do that, and you feel like a conductor of an orchestra making something happen. So it's fun to do.
I was going to say, and a really talented director.
Well, no. Just steering the car. Somebody else is the engine.
He's downplaying it. We have someone waving their hand in the back, and then I'm going to wrap it up.
Okay.
A similar question about, does the actor get involved? How about the musician? They've written the whole script and are throughout. Have there been times when you've wanted to change the music and you'd had conversations about that?
Absolutely. So, for example, when does this cue start and when does it end? Does it go from the first line of the scene to the end, or do we stop? Do we break? When does it speed up? Should there be some space in between it? And then there's a whole other thing that happened, which I was only vestigially involved with, which is the composer getting with the piano player and working on dynamics of the playing. In the same way that I'm working with the actors on the emotional rhythm of the text, the composer is working with the player on how to coax the maximum amount of expression and feeling out of it, And that was tremendously fun for me to watch, because I saw a parallel process to the one that I engage with the actors going on between a composer and a piano player. And watching Corey up there play, and you watch her shoulder as she, and it's got this incredible sense of emotional power and pregnancy to it, that is really, really thrilling to watch. And I would every once in a while say, that feels too dry to me. That feels too dry. Or, you know what? Oh, no, there's too much in that. Dry it out. And then Caroline would go up and talk to the piano player and figure out the right words to use, because I don't have them, to try and make that work. So, yeah, it was really fun, really, really fun process. I mean, I think the takeaway for audience, who knows what you're all going to think of it. You'll all see it, you'll all like it, you won't like it, I don't know. I'm just glad that you're buying tickets and coming to see it. But what I do feel, I really, as the artistic director of the theater, in the same body as the director of this play, is that there is an immense gathering of talent around this show. I mean, the set designer, the costume designer, the lighting designer. I mean, the lighting designer, had 2 shows on Broadway this season. The costume designer was in New York today for the first rehearsal of the revival of Rocky Horror that's coming up. The movement person, we have a movement person just working on the physicality of the actors. She's in New York today for the first rehearsal of the big revival of Cats that's coming up. So it is like, I joke with my kids that I constantly show my age. I don't know if anybody drives Cadillacs anymore, but it's a Cadillac of a show. Everybody involved in this thing is working at the very highest level, including the various crafts departments of the Old Globe. We have the most incredible craft shops in the American theater, our costume shop, our prop shop, our lighting shop, our sound shop. The level of craft here is extremely high. So one of the truly gratifying things about doing this project is just to be sitting there, and during technical rehearsals, there are 75 people in that theater sitting in the dark watching the actors, and the director always sits dead center in the middle because the director is the final arbiter on everything that's going on. And I sat there and I just looked around myself at these people behind me and to my left and to my right and then up on the stage in front of me, and I just said, this is a gathering of American theater making talent that is absolutely extraordinary. And how lucky am I to be in the middle of all of it, and how lucky is San Diego to be able to watch that unfold. It's really tremendous. So I'm just hugely grateful to the Old Globe and proud of the Old Globe that we could attempt something audacious like this and really pull it off.
Well, thank you, Barry. Barry, it's been so much fun chatting with you about this. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the show. Have a good night.